All right, let's talk about why I don't like buying new builds or doing off the plan, especially not off the plan, when building out a property portfolio. So let's go through these pros and cons list. You can screenshot this if you want to, read through it in your own time, but I like to do things with talking points. So if you haven't worked that out already. So let's talk about the cons for new builds first and the why I like established. So first of all, when you are building something new, you are going to build something in today or tomorrow's inflated cost for trades. So the opposite to that is I can buy a house today, an established house, based on what it cost to build something years ago. Now, obviously the value of that property's gone up, relevant to the area and inflation, etc. However, most times, especially for me and my team, I am buying properties, established houses, essentially, number one, under market value, which I'm about to talk to in a moment, but at less than the replacement cost. So I'll give you an example. Say you buy you're doing a new build. Let's just say the land's $300,000. You're able to find land for $300,000. And the new build today, I haven't seen a company that can build a very basic 3-bedroom, 2-bath house for less than $400,000. So 4, 5, 6, 7. So we've got now $700,000 asset, of which I could buy a house in the same area, as an example, for $400,000 or $500,000. So therefore, essentially, I'm getting the house for free and I'm just paying for the land, right? So that's number one. Number two, especially for off the plan, please stay away from off the plan property. Off the plan property, you are typically paying $50,000 to $70,000 more. That's average. Some of them, it's $100,000 you're paying over because the seller is getting a commission. Now, there's this really dodgy guy going around in Australia at the moment. He's actually a broker. He's very famous on TikTok at the moment. He's blowing up. And people ask me about him all the time. I'm like, be wary of him because he sells off the plan property. He's like, I'm a broker and the bank's a bad man and you should pay down the debt on your home. But then in the background, the reason why he's getting you to pay down the debt on your home is so that you then have borrowing capacity and you have equity inside your house, in your home, for him to then sell you an off the plan property, which he will get on average about a $50,000 commission paycheck for selling you that, for overselling you. So therefore, you're overpaying for the thing. And he will hide it underneath the value and the equity of your home. It's fucked up. It's a really bad scam. So that is very, very typical for off-the-plan property. Now, in saying that, off-the-plan property has a lot of bonuses for government grants for first home buyers. I actually still think it's worth, for some people who really just can't get their savings rate up to buy normal established houses, I say, you know what? Just purely because of inflation and how fucked inflation is, eventually first home buyers, to get their foot in the door, will eventually make money off of it, most of the time. So I'm not saying that off the plan should never ever be bought. I'm just saying that should be a last resort and leave it to those who are first home buyers, who the only way to get their foot in the door is take on the grants, and the grants are essentially very favourable when you do off the plan property. So that's probably the only time I'd recommend it. All right. Now, to point number 3 is when you are buying property, especially inside new estates, and typically where there's new developments going on, it's all new land, everything's being built, everything's like there's a new build around there. What happens is when you say, right, I'm going to buy this property for, say, $700,000, the bank then goes to evaluate it, right? And evaluations are done on comparables, so other properties in the area. What I see all the time majority of the time with new builds, is the bank goes, well, there's nothing really to compare it to. So when they go to give you the loan, they'll come down lower than what it's actually worth. So if you bought it for $700,000, they're like, we don't really have anything to compare it to. We actually think it's worth $600,000. Guess what happens? Well, you're short by $100,000. Where are you going to get that money from? You're going to cough that up, or are you going to have to let go and lose the deposit for what you put down on that build? I see this happen so regularly. So you've really got to be careful if you're doing a new build in a new estate or a new suburb that is like up and coming. Be very, very careful with this. This happens a lot. Number 4. To point number 4, probably the biggest, scariest thing is construction companies have crashed all over the place. I'm sure it's not new news to you, but this might be new news to you. During 2022 to 2024, over 2,000 building companies in Australia went down. In other words, they either went fully bankrupt or they went into administration, which is just before bankruptcy. So what was happening during that period is people would sign up to a building company, give them the deposit. Building company went down. People were losing $20,000, $30,000 as deposit they were putting down. Because of the rate of inflation going up so much, those building companies just weren't good at forecasting for inflation, didn't anticipate it, and they just simply weren't good at managing their money. And that is also something scary as well, because now you're relying on something outside of your control. And so this is another reason why I don't like new builds, is there's just too many variables which are just not certain. But with established, a lot of things are certain. And also me now being a business owner, I now know what it takes to build a successful business. And there is a lot of things that you need to be very good at. And just because you're a building company, you're good at building, doesn't mean you're good at business. So you need to understand that the company that you're utilizing also can be saved. So for example, when there's a whole bunch of building companies about to go down, and there were a few where literally they got bailed out. So this is typically what happens with banks when big banks are about to go down and they should have collapsed. The governments will usually say, oh, we'll just print money and fucking give you money, because if you fail, well, we can't have you fail because you're a really, really big one. So we'll just fucking give you money to keep you afloat. It's fucked up. It's one big Ponzi scheme, if I'm being honest with you. So if you were absolutely to build, then I would be sticking with one of the big ones. But in saying that, there are a number of massive big companies that we all know of, especially some major ones in Victoria that, the banks and the government was like, oh, well, too bad, crash. I know you've got 70 properties that you're in the middle of building. Oh, well. Okay, so the next one, point number 5, is the land holding costs for up to 18 months. So again, sometimes builders can have a guarantee of, like, they'll say, we guarantee to build your property in X amount of time. Let's just say it's 8 months or 12 months, which it used to be. Since 2020 and the inflation hike that we've had, the average builds have now blown up to an 18-month wait. So you've got to calculate, do you have money and spare money for that 18 months worth of holding costs to pay the mortgage repayments of the land? And maybe you don't have those holding costs because maybe you're buying the land off the owner. Okay, but then I'd question you to say, well, now you've got capital tied up sitting there waiting, doing nothing. So too many times I see people where they've got like $200,000, they're ready to implement it straight away into a new build, but they're sitting there just waiting for the new build to happen. Meanwhile, that $200,000 could have bought you 2 properties, which from day one that you've settled, you're making money straight away, and then you could get an income statement straight away from your tenant instantly. So it's producing cash flow from day one. You're not having the holding cost and the opportunity cost of your capital not moving somewhere. So that's critical. It's just slower. It's just so slow. Why wait when you don't have to wait to make money? That waiting time frame, whether it's 6 months or 18 months, that has an opportunity cost to it. To point number 6, so trade shortages. Trade shortages are something that a lot of people have not planned for. That they assume that there's trades to do a job. So, for example, in Queensland and WA, especially WA, the trade shortages are wild. I'm trying to get a toilet fixed. It takes 3 weeks just for someone to get me a quote on fixing a toilet. I've got clients who are waiting for just small stuff on the roofs to get fixed. 4-week wait again just to get a quote, and then another 3 weeks until they can actually physically do the job. So there's a lot of trade shortages. Again, you're relying on something external to you, and you're just putting out there more variables of things to go wrong that is uncertain. And I want to reduce the variables of uncertainty. That's just me personally. Okay, capital growth and borrowing capacity is tied up. Again, actually it's kind of like to point number 5 that I was talking about. Again, your borrowing capacity is now tied up. So it's not just about the capital growth and you're missing out on compounding your capital. Now we're also missing out on your borrowing capacity tied up. Because maybe you're waiting, maybe you have even more borrowing capacity, capital that you could do in an established house whilst you're waiting for the build to happen. Well, guess what? Maybe you don't have the borrowing capacity to do two though, right? Maybe if we were to then go buy the established house, then we're uncertain about the borrowing capacity that you need for the next build as well. So again, a lot of uncertainty, right? Things getting tied up, things being that you're on hold. I just don't like the idea of being on hold. I'm a manifestor through human design, so a lot of this I don't like because I'm always thinking about what's the quickest way. Number 9, what did I write? Oh, this is a big one. So this comes down to evaluations as well. So when we go and get bank evaluations, a lot of there's 3 different types of bank evaluations. There's ones where they will do what we call an electronic or a desktop evaluation, which is just an average of the area. Then there's a curve where they just drive down the street. Then there's a physical walk-in. Now, you don't get to dictate which bank does it in what way, okay? However, most banks will do, especially the major Big 10 banks that we would typically use, they typically do evaluations based on electronical averages, so desktops. If you do a new build and your house is new in an area with a whole bunch of older established houses, though because they're older, they could bring down the value of what your property is really worth. So, say for example, your property might truly be worth, say, $700,000, right? So someone's willing to pay $700,000 for it. However, the averages of the other ones could be, $600, $650. And so that $50,000 difference could be the thing that is your deal or no deal, like the money that is required to do the next deal, to get your next property. And so again, you might be stuck in having to choose one of those lenders though that only do desktop. Maybe that lender doesn't do a walk-in. In that situation, you might be lucky where you can choose a lender specifically if you have a good enough broker to then choose a lender who will go, well, fuck this, we'll go to another lender who will do what we call a walk-in, where they'll book in an appointment and come and see it. Then that might work out in your favor. But again, now you're giving yourself even more restrictions because now you're restricted to potentially using lenders which aren't going to have favorable terms and conditions. So it's just, again, something else that blocks you a little bit and gives you more challenges than what you really need. Okay, let's move on to my favorite stuff, the upsides of buying established. Number 1, you can buy established houses under market value. So if a house is worth $600,000, typically with established houses, we can go in and then buy it for maybe, $560,000, $540,000. So you can make an additional $40,000 or $60,000 of money straight away from the day that you settle. You can't do that with established. It's very, very difficult to do that. With new builds, you physically can't do that, right? Because you're building it new, you're not buying it as established. You're signing it on for the contract and paying the builder for that particular price. To point number 2, I mentioned this one before, we can typically buy houses under a replacement cost. That's essentially my goal. Tip for me, I want to have a lot of houses where I couldn't rebuild it for the same price. That is a win-win for me. It's cash flowing from day one, so no holding costs. I've gone through that. Banks, again, are more certain on the evaluations. Again, what I was talking to before with the new builds, it's a little bit uncertain. What did I put here? Because we're able to buy established houses, typically a little bit less than what you could do a new build. So for example, the cheapest you could do a new build is $700,000. With an established house, like right now in the middle of 2024, we're able to buy elite properties for, say, $500,000. And then typically those rents are then higher, which means the yields are higher, which means what? Your borrowing capacity is able to be protected a lot more as well. And again, if you've listened to a lot of my videos, I'd say 60 to 70% of the game is convincing the bank to give you money. And having higher gross rental yields is easier on established houses, which means, again, you're playing the game and tricking the bank to give you more money longer, and you're protecting your borrowing capacity longer. Okay, so I did mention this one a little bit before. So you can borrow money straight away. So typically with an established house, depending on your lender, we can just use a rental appraisal. So you don't even have to have a tenant in the door, and you don't even have to have the first month's rent. Sometimes you do, depending on your lender. But again, there's no holding costs here, right? So we can essentially get a rental appraisal and start borrowing money from the day that you've put in an offer, contract is signed. We can start working on your pre-approval for the next one straight away, just with that rental appraisal. And then we can build in a condition to the next pre-approval to say, on the condition that this house that you're in the middle of buying then has a tenant in by day one. So we can fast track it, we can move quicker. And again, it's about speed, right? And then to point number 7 is we can add value. So this is one of the 3 main boxes that I teach people on. What are the 3 main boxes that you need in order to build a successful property portfolio? One of them is buying a high growth area, so you've got suburbs growing, booming. You're also buying something with a higher yield, so you're not focusing on negative gearing. You're focusing on working towards a positive gearing strategy. And the third bucket is we must have the option to add value to that as an exit strategy, or as like an extra card up your sleeve for a rainy day. So what an add value means is we want to have a house where you can either do a small cosmetic renovation, or you can add on a granny flat, probably not ideally, because again, that comes down to building, or do a subdivision. That's probably more what I would be leaning towards. So the reason why we want to be able to add value is it allows us to control the land. It allows us to say, well, in my portfolio, if I have 6 houses that are all brand new builds, well, I'm stuck. I can't add value to any of them. And you might need to add value to either one. Maybe you're restricted, because always whenever you want to move your portfolio, it's about 2 major numbers: borrowing capacity, aka cash flow coming in, and equity or cash for the next deal. And so having an option to add value, like for example, doing a small cosmetic renovation, that can give you the option of maybe potentially unsticking you of one of those 2 boxes. So for me, I can look at my entire portfolio and be like, you know what? If I needed 100K one day, you know what would be really easy for me to do? Right, I've got borrowing capacity because I looked at focused on high yields. So I can go to the bank, pull out, say, $20,000 of equity, and then I can use that $20,000 to then do a small cosmetic renovation. For example, brand new carpet, brand new paint throughout the house, and brand new blinds, and really modernize it up a little bit, and maybe, touch up the kitchen a little bit, right? And that could then it could do 2 things for me. One, it could increase the capital value of my property. Very unlikely with this small cosmetic renovations, but that type of renovation would be more geared towards increasing the rent. And then maybe that extra $20,000 that I spent on the rent could then give me an extra $100 a week, which then overall, that $100 extra per week could give me an extra $5,000 per year. And then if I do the rule of how much you can borrow at the moment, which is typically 5 times your income. So if I had to do 5,000, or it's 5,200, that $5,200 times by 5 could give me an extra $26,000 in borrowing capacity. Times by, let's just say, my 6 houses, that could now give me an additional $156,000. And that is just when interest rates are really high. And when interest rates are low, that could be an additional $246,000 in terms of borrowing capacity. And again, that might be the thing that gets you the next property across the line. So you can see how all these little things add up over time. And last but not least, probably one of my favorite ones is older houses. Again, what I was explaining to you before around newer houses can be devalued. Older houses can be valuated more than what they really are when it comes to a bank, and pulling out equity for your next deal. I actually have this exact scenario. So I have this one property in this suburb where this house is fucked. It's so old. It's so run down. The location is amazing. I bought this particular property specifically to do a subdivision on it one day because it's a really large block, and I can easily add on a house, a brand new build right at the back, very, very easily. And this particular house is so old, I truly think I could sell it for $400,000. However, the average that it's been, because of the average of all the other houses in the area, the averages have bumped up the value of this house. And I got a bank evaluation on it for $470,000. Now, that extra $70,000 could literally be the thing that gets you the money for the next property again, right? And this is, again, something as an extra added bonus. Now, this doesn't happen all the time. However, if you've got that really old rundown house and we get the we get the desktop evaluations with the average, where your house is lower than the average, oh, that's amazing. That's a win-win. And that is very, very common in our world. It might only be $20,000 or $30,000. Again, that literally happened for one of my clients, where his was evaluated $30,000 more than what we truly thought it was. And I was like, this is a win, dude, take it. Which not only meant he could pull out the equity for the next property, it also meant that he didn't have to pay LMI because the property was worth more. So therefore, he didn't have to take his LVR up higher. I'm getting into some really nerdy stuff now, but yeah, it can have some huge win-wins. So there you go. That's my thought on new builds versus established. So typically for most people starting to build out a property portfolio, typically it works for most people to be doing established houses for these particular reasons. Now, in saying this, sometimes I do have tradies come to me who are like, well, Liv, I have a building license and it would all be backed by me and I have the skills and all of that sort of stuff. Great. Then do it if you really want to. However, I would just consider and think to yourself, is there an easier way for me to make money? So for me, I would rather lean on AI to do the heavy lifting of finding a suburb that's going to grow and just let it grow whilst I sleep, rather than me manufacturing the equity. So this, that's in terms of physically building a house as well. Sorry, I was going on a bit of a tangent there. So yeah, if you are a tradie or if you're already a builder who has a license, or you have friends who have licenses and you trust that process, then great, do that. Just consider all of these other things as well. So hopefully this was of value for you. I would absolutely love to know what your biggest takeaway was of this. So if you could please comment below, just let me know which point was your biggest takeaway. And it helps me, helps other people, and helps create better content for my viewers and other people out there. And remember, let's just build wealth with ease, because that's what life is all about. Is how do we get the highest ROI in life? And us millennials, I believe that I'm here to help people work out how we can do things easier, because I believe that we're a little bit lazy. There's an easier way of doing things these days.